In the shadowed heart of Eldridge Village, a desperate mother stands with $1 in her pocket, begging for formula to save her feverish 2-year-old son. Unaware, the cloaked stranger behind her is the Alpha King himself, his senses catching every tremor in her voice. What begins as a simple act of mercy awakens an ancient prophecy, drawing hunters from rival packs and igniting a forbidden bond. But as secrets unravel and danger closes in, one question haunts them both. Can love born from guilt survive the storm? The apothecary door creaked on rusted hinges, letting in a gust of autumn wind. Fiona stepped inside, Jonah balanced on her hip, his small arms wrapped tight around her neck. At 2, he was getting too heavy for her slight frame after a long day, but she couldn't set him down. Not here, not with the fever burning hot against her skin. Lanterns swung gently overhead, casting flickering gold across crammed shelves. Behind the counter, old Harlan peered over Half Moon, spectacles, his mouth already thinning into a line. "Formula again, Fiona?" She swallowed. "Just 1 bottle. Please." Jonah whimpered, burying his face in her shoulder. His curls, dark and unruly, just like Joran's, tickled her cheek. Harlan sighed, reaching for the shelf. "It's $2.50 now." Blight hit the southern meadows hard. "Can't make exceptions anymore, Fiona." Fiona's fingers tightened on the worn pouch at her waist. She tipped the contents onto the counter. 1 crumpled dollar bill, 2 dimes, 3 pennies. The coins looked pathetic under the lantern light. "That's all I have," she said quietly. Harlan's gaze softened for half a second, then hardened again. "I'm sorry, lass. Can't do it." Jonah lifted his head, blinking at the old man with big hazel eyes. "Please?" he asked in his soft, earnest voice. His dimples flashed hopefully, even through the fever flush on his cheeks. "Please, nice man. For Mama?" The shopkeeper froze, caught off guard by the plea. Fiona's throat closed. She turned, to leave before the tears could fall, murmuring apologies to no one in particular. "Wait." The voice came from behind her, low, resonant, carrying the weight of command. The line of patrons parted instinctively. Fiona glanced over her shoulder. He stood near the door, cloaked in dark wool that seemed to drink the light. Tall, broad-shouldered, hood shadowing most of his face, but not his eyes. Storm gray, flecked with gold that caught the lantern glow like embers. He met her gaze steadily, and something inside her lurched, as if some buried part of her had been waiting for that look. Without a word, he stepped forward and placed 3 gold coins on the counter. They gleamed brighter than anything in the room. Harlan blinked. "That's more than—" "Keep the change," the stranger said. Fiona stared at the coins, then at him. "I can't. You already have." He inclined his head slightly toward Jonah, who was now staring at the man with wide, curious eyes. "For the little one." Jonah tilted his head, then puffed out his tiny chest as far as it would go. "One day I'll be big like you," he said, before flashing a bright grin that showed all his tiny teeth. The stranger's mouth twitched, almost a smile, gone in an instant. Fiona gathered the bottle Harlan handed over, tucking it into her shawl. "Thank you," she whispered. Her words felt inadequate. He said nothing more, only watched as she hurried out into the gathering dusk. The walk home was a blur of cobblestones and wind. Fiona's cottage sat on the village edge, thatched roof sagging, walls patched with whatever she could scavenge. Inside, Aunt Leda waited by the hearth, stirring thin stew. "Any luck?" Leda asked. Fiona shook her head, then held up the bottle. "A stranger paid." Leda's brows rose. "In this village? Must have been passing through." Fiona mixed the formula with trembling hands, Jonah perched on her lap. She measured the powder carefully, heart twisting at how little there was in the bottle. Most children weaned by one, their bodies strong and sure, but Jonah's mixed blood kept him fragile. He drank quickly, making those soft, contented noises that always ease the knot in her chest, one small hand patting her arm in steady rhythm. When he finished, he let out a little sigh, leaned back against her, and murmured, "Better now, Mama." She kissed his fever-damp forehead. Jonah's breathing steadied against her chest, but when his eyes caught the moonlight, they shimmered gold for a heartbeat before fading back to Hazel. It had been happening more often lately. Villagers whispered about shifter taint, even though Joren had been only a beta. Fiona told herself it was nothing, just echoes of his father, just a phase. A knock shattered the quiet. Leda rose first, peering through the crack. "Royal insignia," she breathed. Fiona's stomach dropped. She lifted Jonah, who stirred and clung tighter. Outside stood a rider in black, wolf and thorn crest on his cloak. "Fiona Emerson?" he called. She opened the door a sliver. "You're summoned to Shadowfen Keep, by order of King Felix." The name landed like a stone in her gut. Felix, the Alpha King who had crushed the Pack Wars with ruthless precision, the one they called the Shadow Wolf. What could he possibly want from her? The rider's eyes flicked to Jonah. "Bring the child. No delay." Dawn was breaking when they reached the keep's gates, tall iron wrought with snarling wolves, set into sheer mountain cliffs. Mist clung to the stone, and distant howls echoed from the peaks. Fiona held Jonah close as they were led through torchlit corridors, past guards who stared too long at her unmarked skin, her human blood. They stopped before heavy oak doors. The rider knocked once. "Enter," came a low voice from inside. The doors swung open. Felix stood by a massive hearth, cloak discarded, revealing dark leather armor etched with subtle runes. No crown, only the quiet authority of a predator at rest. His gray-gold eyes found hers immediately. "You," Fiona said, the word escaping before she could stop it. He inclined his head. "Yes." Jonah peeked from her shoulder. "Big man?" he asked, this time with delighted recognition. Felix's expression softened, just a fraction, but enough to make Fiona's pulse stutter. "Sit," he said, gesturing to chairs by the fire. "We have much to discuss." She didn't move. "Why am I here?" "Because your son is in danger." He stepped closer, voice lowering. "An ancient prophecy speaks of a child born of human and shifter blood under the blood moon, a child whose awakening could unite the packs or destroy them." Fiona's arms tightened around Jonah. Jonah was born 2 winters ago. The blood moon was the night he was conceived. Felix's gaze never wavered, but for a split second something shadowed his eyes. Regret or guilt, gone so fast Fiona thought she'd imagined it. "I've tracked the signs for months. His delayed weaning, the golden flashes in his eyes, the way he seeks pack bonds. He is the child of 2 bloods." Her mind reeled. Jonah fussed, sensing her tension, and patted her cheek. "Mama okay?" She forced a smile for him. "Mama's okay." Felix watched the exchange, something unreadable flickering across his face. Rival packs know of him. Lady Esme of Crescent Vale has already sent scouts. They will not ask nicely. Fiona's blood chilled. "And you? What do you want with him?" Felix held her gaze, unflinching. "To protect him." Then his voice dropped as he added, "And you?" Fiona searched his eyes, looking for deception, for the cold calculation she'd always expected from kings and alphas. Instead, she found intensity, but layered beneath it was something raw, almost pained, like a wound that had never quite healed. She opened her mouth to press him. What price would this protection demand? When a low, distant horn sounded from the battlements. Shouts followed, muffled at first, then sharper, echoing down stone corridors like breaking glass. Felix's head snapped toward the heavy doors. His nostrils flared, scenting the air. "They're here," he said. Fiona's arms tightened around Jonah instinctively. He had gone still on her hip, sensing the shift in the room before she did, his small body tensing, little fingers curling into the fabric of her dress. "Mama?" he whispered, voice tiny and trembling. "It's okay, sweetheart," she murmured, pressing her lips to his curls. "Mama's got you." Felix moved to the center of the room in one fluid step, positioning himself between them and the doors. His shoulders rolled, muscles coiling under the leather armor. "Stay behind me," he ordered, no matter what. The first crash came without warning, glass exploding inward from the tall arched windows, shards raining across the flagstones like deadly hail. Black-clad figures dropped from the battlements above, landing in crouches with expert grace. Their masks were featureless leather, eyes glinting cold through slits. Blades flashed in the firelight, curved daggers serrated at the edges. Assassins. Felix didn't hesitate. His shift was partial but brutal. Eyes blazing molten gold, canines lengthening, claws extending from his fingertips with a soft, wet snick. A deep growl rolled from his chest, vibrating the air itself. The lead assassin lunged, dagger arcing toward Felix's throat. Felix caught the wrist mid-strike, twisted with bone-crunching force, and hurled the man into the wall. Stone cracked on impact. The assassin slid down, dazed. Jonah let out a small, frightened whimper and buried his face in Fiona's neck, his whole body shaking. "Mama's safe," he chattered against her skin, voice wobbly but fierce. "I keep Mama safe." Another assassin slipped past Felix's guard, fast and silent, aiming straight for Fiona. She backed against the cold stone wall, Jonah clutched to her chest, pulse thundering in her ears. Felix roared, a sound that shook dust from the rafters, primal and furious, and launched himself across the room. He collided with the attacker in a blur of motion, claws raking, across armored leather. Blood sprayed in a dark arc. The assassin screamed once before Felix slammed him face first into the floor. In the heartbeat of chaos, Jonah lifted his head just enough to peek out. His eyes were huge, tears clinging to his lashes, but they locked on Felix, on the blood-smeared claws, the glowing gaze, the raw power holding back the nightmare. Instead of recoiling, Jonah's trembling hand reached out, small fingers stretching toward the king. The last assassin made a desperate lunge. Felix turned, chest heaving, blood dripping from his knuckles. His free hand shot out, caught the blade, twisted, and snapped the attacker's arm with a sickening pop. The man crumpled without a sound. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the hearth and Jonah's quiet, hiccuping breaths. Felix straightened slowly, claws fully retracted now, eyes fading back to storm gray. Blood streaked his armor, but he ignored it. He looked at Fiona, searching her face for fear, for rejection. Then his gaze dropped to Jonah, who hadn't stopped reaching, tiny hands still open, trusting. Something flickered across Felix's face. Surprise, then a softening so profound it bordered on pain. Felix stepped closer, slow, careful. He lowered himself to one knee so the boy could reach. Jonah's fingers brushed the scarred edge of Felix's cheek, tentative at first, then firmer, patting gently as if soothing a hurt animal. The touch was feather-light, but Felix exhaled deeply. "I'm sorry you had to see that, little one," Felix murmured, voice rough from the growl still lingering in his throat. Jonah blinked up at him, then turned his head to look around the room, the shattered glass glinting like fallen stars, the slumped shadows of the assassins, the streaks of blood on the stone. His little brow furrowed in a serious way. "It's a big mess," he said softly. Then he patted Felix's cheek again with sticky fingers. "I can help clean up." He nodded once, as if that solved everything, his small voice wobbly but brave. Felix's throat worked. He didn't answer right away, just let Jonah's hand rest there, warm and impossibly small against the king's scarred strength. "Stay. Let me protect you both," Felix said quietly, lifting his gaze back to Fiona. "At least until the threat passes." Jonah's head popped up at the word stay. His big hazel eyes widened suddenly. He looked from Felix to the towering stone walls around them, then back to Felix, lashes still damp but now fluttering with excitement. Stay here? His chubby fingers tightened on Felix's sleeve, and a tiny, trembly smile broke through. Jonah like Big Castle. Can we stay, Mama? Fiona met Felix's gaze over her son's head, Jonah still bouncing softly, chanting, stay, stay under his breath like a little mantra of hope. The pull was there, undeniable, terrifying, and growing stronger by the heartbeat. She nodded once, just for the night. The night deepened around Shadowfen Castle as the wind howled outside. Fiona lay in the lavish guest chambers assigned to her, silk sheets that felt like a stranger's embrace, a fire roaring in a hearth. But sleep eluded her. Jonah curled against her side, his small chest rising and falling in exhausted rhythm, one thumb tucked between his lips. The big castle had thrilled him earlier, but now in the quiet, doubt clawed at her. Just for the night, she'd said. But as the flames danced shadows across the tapestries depicting ancient pack battles, Fiona wondered if one night would turn into more. Felix's face lingered in her thoughts. Those storm-gray eyes, the way he'd knelt before Jonah with a tenderness that didn't fit a king's reputation. She pushed it away, fingers tracing the faint scar on her wrist from Joran's playful bite during their courtship. He had been her forever, until the wars stole him. No shifter, no matter how regal, could replace that ache. Morning came with a soft knock. A servant entered, bearing trays of warm bread, cheeses, and a fresh bottle of formula, richer than any Fiona had seen, laced with herbs that promised strength. Jonah stirred, rubbing his eyes. "Big Wolf?" he asked hopefully, peering around. "Not here, sweetheart," Fiona murmured, though her heart skipped at the thought. They ate in silence, Jonah helping by crumbling bread into tiny pieces and offering them to her with pride. "So Mama can be strong." She smiled, but tension coiled tight in her stomach. When the servant returned to clear the trays, she delivered a message. "The king requests your presence in the great hall, for your safety." Fiona dressed Jonah in the simple tunic he'd worn from home, refusing the fine clothes laid out. They were led down winding stairs. The great hall was a grand cavern, vaulted ceilings etched with constellations, long tables scarred from feasts and councils, banners fluttering with the Shadowfen crest. Felix waited at the head table, maps spread before him, flanked by advisors. His eyes lifted as they entered, softening at Jonah's toddle. "Good morning," he said. Jonah beamed, wobbling forward. "Morning, Big Wolf." He raised his arms expectantly, as if for a lift. Fiona tensed, but Felix only chuckled, a rare, warm sound, and crouched to Jonah's level. "And good morning to you, little warrior." He didn't touch, but Jonah patted his knee anyway, giggling. Fiona's chin lifted, though her hands trembled slightly at her sides. She drew a steadying breath, forcing her voice to remain even. "Thank you," she said first. "For last night. For protecting us when you didn't have to." Felix inclined his head, the smallest acknowledgement. Something in his gaze softened at her gratitude, a flicker so brief she might have imagined it. She swallowed, then continued. "But I still need to ask, why summon us here this morning?" Felix straightened fully. "To discuss your stay. The attack last night was no coincidence. Esme's scouts are bold, more will come. Here, the wards are the strongest." "For how long?" she asked. "I'm no shifter. Jonah and we don't belong in your world. We never have." The words hung between them, laced with the quiet fear that had always lived in her bones. Humans like her were tolerated on the fringes, never invited into the heart of a pack. To stay longer felt like stepping onto thin ice over a frozen lake, beautiful, but one wrong move and everything could crack. Felix's gaze held hers. "Perhaps you belong more than you know." He gestured to a side door. "The archives are open to you. Learn what you wish about the prophecy. Knowledge is your armor." She hesitated, then nodded. As they walked away, Jonah twisted in her arms to wave over her shoulder. "Bye, Big Wolf," he called cheerfully, voice bright and echoing off the stone walls like a little bell. With Jonah in tow, she followed a guard to the archives, a labyrinth of towering shelves, scrolls yellowed with age, air thick with dust and ink. Fiona dove in, fingers tracing faded runes. Hours blurred as she uncovered fragments. The child, of two bloods, born under the blood moon, would bridge divides or shatter them. But deeper texts hinted at Jonah's peculiarities, the delayed weaning, the fragile digestion, not as weaknesses, but as incomplete blood. His shifter side slumbered, awaiting a catalyst, the true mate bond of his guardian. The mother's heart unbound awakens the cub's full roar. Her stomach twisted. Joran had been her mate, but their bond had never felt like the legends, fierce, unbreakable. Was that why Jonah struggled? As days slipped into a week, the castle's rhythm enveloped them. Felix maintained distance during councils, but his small gestures crept in like vines through stone. One evening, as Jonah fussed with a fever flare, a knock brought Felix himself, carrying a carved wooden wolf, its fur etched with meticulous detail. "For the little one," he said, placing it on the table. Jonah's eyes lit. "Wolf!" He snatched it, hugging it tight. "Papa Wolf," he named it. Felix returned the next night with a larger one, King Wolf. Jonah beamed, toddling after Felix in the corridor, mimicking his long strides with exaggerated stomps. Felix slowed, letting Jonah catch up. "Well done, pup." The words slipped out, and Fiona's heart clenched. Joran used to call him that. "He's not anyone's pup," she said, the words steady even though they trembled inside. "He's just Jonah. My Jonah." Felix stopped walking entirely. He turned, crouching so he was eye level with both of them, his broad frame folding with careful grace. The corridor lanterns cast gold across his scarred cheekbones, but his expression was open, unguarded in a way that made her chest ache. "I know," he said simply. "I overstepped." Jonah, oblivious to the undercurrent, reached up and patted Felix's knee again. "Stomp more, Big Wolf?" Felix's gaze flicked to Fiona first. She swallowed the last remnant of old grief, then nodded once. "He likes the stomping." Felix's mouth curved. He rose and resumed walking at half speed, letting Jonah match, him step for step. "Stomp, stomp," Jonah chanted happily, arms swinging. Fiona followed a pace behind, arms crossed loosely over her chest. When they reached the chamber door, Felix stopped again. "Bedtime story?" Jonah asked hopefully, looking between them with those big hazel eyes. Felix glanced at Fiona. "Only if your mother says yes." She hesitated, the pull of Jonah's expectant face warring with the quiet warning in her heart. "One story," she conceded, "but short. He's already half asleep on his feet." They stepped inside. Fiona settled on the edge of the bed with Jonah in her lap. Felix stood near the hearth at first until Jonah patted the space beside them insistently. "Sit, Big Wolf. Story time." Felix sat carefully and began the story about a lone wolf who found his way home after a long winter. Jonah listened rapt, snuggling deeper against Fiona's chest, but his small hand kept reaching out to pat Felix's arm every few sentences, as if making sure the storyteller was still there. Fiona watched them both. The king who could command armies reduced to gentle narration, the son who should have been afraid of shifters but wasn't, and felt the last edge of her defensiveness dull. As Jonah drifted off to sleep, Fiona felt the space between her and Felix shrink, without either of them shifting an inch. She should have stood, should have thanked him and sent him away. Instead, she stayed, pulse loud in her ears. Felix's gaze lifted slowly from Jonah to her face. The gold flecks in his gray eyes caught the firelight, steady and searching. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than it had been during the story. He trusts easily. Fiona's throat tightened. He's 2. The world hasn't taught him to be afraid yet. Has it taught you? The question landed soft but piercing. She looked down at Jonah's sleeping face instead of answering, tracing the curve of his cheek with her thumb. It taught me enough. Then I'm grateful he still reaches. Silence stretched again, thick, with everything unsaid. Fiona felt the pull, the dangerous magnetic thing that had been building since the apothecary, since his voice cut through the crowd and his coins hit the counter. It lived in the way his hand had steadied her elbow 2 nights ago when she'd stumbled on the uneven stairs leading to the archives. His fingers had curled around her arm just long enough to right her balance, then released quickly, but not before she felt the warmth seep through her sleeve, sparks racing up her skin. She'd muttered a thank you too quickly, pulled away too sharply, and spent the rest of the day avoiding corridors where she might encounter him again. It lived in the way his gaze sometimes found her across the great hall during meals, quiet, unwavering, as though he were memorizing the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear or smiled at Jonah's babbling. Each time she caught him looking, something dormant in her chest stirred. And each time she reminded herself, I buried one shifter. I won't bury another. Tonight the reminder felt thinner, frayed at the edges. Felix shifted slightly, careful not to jostle Jonah. I should go, he said, though he made no immediate move to stand. Fiona swallowed. You should. He nodded once, slow. Good night, Fiona. He left the door cracked, the hallway torchlight spilling in like a promise. The mystery deepened with Jonah's traits. One afternoon, she was back at the archives, Jonah trailing behind her like a small shadow, clutching Papa Wolf and King Wolf in his arms. Fiona sat cross-legged on the archive floor with a heavy tome open on her lap. Jonah had grown bored of drawing wolves and wandered to the nearest shelf, stretching on tiptoes toward a scroll tucked just out of reach. His little face scrunched in concentration, tongue poking between his lips, one arm extended as far as it would go. Come on, scroll, come down. Jonah wants story. Fiona glanced up. Use your words, sweetheart. Ask Mama to help. But Jonah was already committed. He hopped once, twice. Then as frustration flickered across his face, a soft shimmer rippled over his hands. His fingers lengthened, knuckles rounding, soft silver fur blooming along the backs of his hands. Jonah froze. He stared at his tiny paws, eyes huge and round with wonder. The shift held for a heartbeat, then snapped back, hands returning to toddler fingers mid-reach. The scroll tumbled down into his waiting arms. He blinked once, twice, then burst into the brightest, bubbliest giggle Fiona had ever heard. Mama, look! Paws like wolf. He held up his hands as though they might sprout fur again any second, wiggling his fingers proudly. Jonah Big Wolf now. See? He made little claw motions in the air, then hugged the scroll to his chest like a trophy. Fiona's breath caught in her throat. She set the tome aside and crawled over to him on her knees, heart hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. Let me see, baby, she whispered, taking his hands in hers. They were warm, soft, perfectly ordinary toddler hands, no trace of fur or claw, just faint jam stains from breakfast. She turned them over, searching. Nothing. Jonah tilted his head, still grinning. Mama okay? Jonah did good? You did so good, she managed, pulling him into her lap and burying her face in his curls for a moment to hide the sudden sting in her eyes. But inside, panic swirled cold and sharp. The catalyst was the mate bond. Was it Felix? No. She pushed the thought away. The full moon rose crimson over the castle, turning the central grove into a bowl of shadowed silver. Fiona attended because there was no refusing a pack ritual, not when Felix had quietly asked, and not when Jonah's curious eyes had lit up at the promise of a big wolf party. She held her son close, Jonah's small body warm against her chest, his fingers tangled in the collar of her borrowed cloak. The air was thick with pine resin, burning herbs, and the low electric hum of anticipation. Shifters ringed the clearing in a loose circle, their eyes already gleaming gold in the moonlight, breaths fogging like smoke. Felix stood at the center, barefoot on the moss, dark tunic open at the throat. He raised his arms and began the chant, deep, rolling words in the old tongue that vibrated through the ground and into Fiona's bones. The pack joined, voices layering until the grove thrummed like a living heart. Jonah watched, mesmerized, chin resting on Fiona's shoulder, tiny mouth open in wonder. Then the moonlight poured over him. Jonah wriggled suddenly, harder and faster than Fiona expected from his small body. She tightened her arms instinctively, but he was already twisting free with surprising strength, slipping through her grasp. Her fingers clutched at empty air, heart lurching into her throat. Jonah. Wait. He hit the moss on all fours, landing in a soft puff of silver fur. Fluffy ears sprouted from his dark curls, a bushy tail flicked behind him, patches of shimmering fur blooming across his arms and cheeks like frost spreading over glass. He yipped once, a bright puppy sound, and scrambled forward before Fiona could even lunge. She stumbled after him, pulse roaring in her ears, but he was too quick, too sure-footed on his new paws. He toddled straight across the moss in a determined little waddle, tail high and wagging furiously, straight to Felix. The pack inhaled as one. Jonah reached Felix's leg, pressed his small furry face against the king's thigh in perfect instinctive submission, and babbled, "Alpha. Alpha wolf." His golden eyes shone up at Felix, tail wagging so hard his whole back wobbled. Felix froze mid-chant. Then, slowly, reverently, he crouched. One large hand hovered, hesitated, then settled gently on Jonah's head, between the new ears. The boy leaned into the touch with a contented rumble. "The child awakens," Felix said, voice rough with awe. He lifted Jonah carefully, holding him high so the moonlight washed over them both. A ripple of murmurs spread through the pack, wonder and fear mixed together. Fiona stood rooted at the edge of the circle, arms empty, chest caving in. She watched her son, nestled in the king's hold, tail still wagging, tiny paws batting playfully at Felix's hair. The sight was beautiful, but it was also a knife twisting slowly between her ribs. Loss hit first, sharp and cold. Jonah reaching for someone else, leaning into someone else's strength. Then came the fear, raw, primal. What if this moment changed everything? What if the pack claimed him now, pulled him away into their world of claws and howls? She felt the ground tilt beneath her, the grove suddenly too loud, too bright. She pushed forward through the circle, ignoring the startled looks. "Jonah," she said, voice cracking. Felix turned, eyes meeting hers over her son's head. He lowered Jonah immediately, setting him on the moss. The boy shifted back in a shimmer of light, ears and tail vanishing, fur receding, until he was just her toddler again, blinking up at her with sleepy confusion. "Mama?" Jonah reached for her. Fiona scooped him up, holding him so tightly he squeaked in protest. She looked at Felix, eyes burning. "You knew this could happen," she whispered, the words trembling with everything she couldn't yet scream. "You knew the moon might wake him, and you let him come here anyway." Felix's face crumpled. Not anger, not defense, just naked regret. I hoped it would be gentle. I hoped he would feel safe. Safe? Her voice rose despite her effort to keep it low. "He's mine, Felix. He's all I have left. And now the pack sees him as some destined savior, some key to your wars. What happens when they decide he belongs to them more than to me?" The words hung raw between them. The pack had gone silent, watching. Felix stepped closer, hands open at his sides. "He belongs to you," he said, low enough for only her to hear. "I would never take him from you." But the fear had already taken root, thorny and deep. Fiona backed away. Jonah clutched to her chest. "I need space," she managed. She turned and walked, fast, then faster, out of the grove, through torchlit corridors, until she reached the private room they'd been given. Only when the door closed behind her did she let the tears fall, silent and hot, rocking Jonah as he patted her cheek in sleepy concern. "Mama sad? Hug?" "I'm okay, baby," she lied, pressing her lips to his forehead. "Mama's just scared." Later, when Jonah slept fitfully in the big bed, Fiona slipped back to the hallway where Felix waited, alone, firelight carving shadows across his face. He rose when she entered, but didn't approach. She stood just inside the door, arms wrapped around herself. "Tell me the truth," she said. "All of it." Felix exhaled, long and slow. Then he spoke. "Joran didn't die in battle," he began quietly. "He sold pack secrets to Lady Esme, roots, wards, names, for a promise of power in Crescent Vale. I discovered the betrayal myself. As heir, I brought it before the council. My uncle, the Alpha King at the time, had no choice under pack law. He executed Joran to protect the realm." Felix's voice cracked on the last word. "I stood there. I watched. I could have argued for mercy, could have fought harder for exile instead of death. I didn't. Afterward, I made sure you and Jonah were provided for, anonymously. Coin left at the cottage, supplies delivered through traders. I couldn't let his betrayal destroy you both." He looked at her then, eyes shadowed with old pain. "But I never expected this." He gestured helplessly between them, the space that had grown charged and fragile over weeks of shared glances, small touches, bedtime stories, and Jonah's trusting pats. Fiona felt the ground drop away. "Your people killed him," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. Felix nodded once. "Yes." Tears spilled over. She pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle the sob that wanted to escape. Jonah stirred faintly in the next room. She forced herself quiet, breath shuddering. "And you never told me. I thought the truth would hurt you more than the lie ever could." His eyes were dark with shame, shoulders bowed. "I was wrong." She stared at him, the Alpha King who had knelt for her son, who had bled for them. The same man who had discovered her husband's treason, stood witness to his death, and then spent years quietly keeping her and Jonah alive. The anger she braced for didn't arrive in a rush. Instead came grief. Old grief for Joran's choices, new grief for the lie she'd lived under, and a complicated ache for the man in front of her who had carried this secret like a blade. It twisted together until she could barely breathe. She turned away, wiping her face. "I can't do this right now," she whispered. "I need to think. She didn't finish. She simply walked out, scooping Jonah from the bed where he slept, and slipped through a side passage into the night. The forest swallowed them, cold air, pine needles. Underfoot, the distant howl of wolves that no longer felt like threat, but like mourning. She didn't get far. Shadows moved. A guard, face half hidden by a hood, stepped from the trees. "For the Regent," he snarled, and before Fiona could scream, he wrenched Jonah from her arms. Jonah had been asleep against her shoulder, limp with exhaustion from his first shift, but the sudden yank jolted him awake. His eyes flew open. A sharp, terrified wail tore from his throat. Mama Fiona lunged, nails raking the man's arm, but he shoved her hard. She stumbled backward, knees hitting cold earth, breath knocked out of her. The traitor vanished into the dark with Jonah, her son's small, panicked cries fading fast into the trees. Fiona's scream ripped free then, raw and endless, echoing through the forest as she scrambled to her feet, hands empty. Felix burst from the shadows moments later, half-shifted, silver-black fur receding as he dropped to human form. His eyes found her on her knees, voice already hoarse from calling Jonah's name into the dark. Rage and regret carved deep lines across his face. He knelt beside her in one fluid motion, close enough that she could feel the heat rolling off him, but he didn't touch her. She looked up, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her cheek. "He's gone," she choked. "They took him." Felix's jaw clenched so hard a muscle ticked. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face with both hands, thumbs brushing away the tears with a tenderness that stole what little breath she had left. "I swear on my blood we'll bring him home." His palms were warm against her cold skin, grounding. For one heartbeat she leaned into them, letting the contact anchor her before the panic surged again. She nodded once, sharp, desperate. "Then we go." They moved without another word. Under moonlight, they left the castle behind. Felix shifted to wolf form, massive, silver-black, eyes glowing like embers, and loped ahead, nose to the ground, picking up the traitor's scent in seconds. Fiona mounted the swiftest horse from the stables, cloak whipping behind her as she followed, every sense sharpened by desperation. The wilds were merciless, thorn-choked trails that tore at her legs, sudden ravines that dropped away without warning, the constant rustle of unseen things watching from the dark. But Jonah's absence was a blade twisting deeper with every mile, driving them faster than any map could. They pushed through the first night without stopping until the horse stumbled. Felix shifted back, breathing hard, and built a small, smokeless fire in a sheltered hollow. Fiona dropped beside it, knees drawn up, staring into the flames as if Jonah might appear in them. Felix crouched across from her, scars silver in the low light. He didn't speak at first, just watched her, waiting. When the silence became too heavy, she broke it. "Joran promised me forever," she whispered, voice cracking. "He left me broken. I can't let myself feel that again. Not for anyone." Felix's gaze never wavered. "The mate bond woke the night I first saw you in the apothecary," he said quietly. "I buried it under guilt, under duty. I told myself it was necessary given what happened to Joran, for standing by while my uncle carried out the sentence I helped bring." He leaned closer, not crossing the fire, but near enough she could feel the heat of him cutting through the cold. But it never went away. And now, with Jonah gone, his voice roughened. "I can't lose him either. Or you." Fiona's breath hitched. The space between them crackled, shared warmth under the furs they'd pulled close against the biting wind, breaths mingling in white plumes, the ache of want warring with the terror of more loss. Felix reached out slowly. His fingers brushed hers where they rested on her knee, light, careful. She didn't pull away. He turned her hand over, palm up, and laced their fingers together. His grip was firm, steady, calloused from years of sword and claw, yet the way he held her was achingly gentle, thumb stroking once over her knuckles like he was memorizing the shape of her. "I'm not asking you to forget Joran. I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. I'm asking you to let me help carry this. Let me help bring him home. And after, if there's an after, we'll figure out the rest. One breath at a time." Tears slipped down her cheeks again, silent this time. She squeezed his hand, hard, like she was afraid he'd vanish too. "Not yet," she whispered, but the words sounded thinner now, frayed at the edges. Felix nodded once, accepting. He didn't push. He simply stayed, close enough to guard her sleep, close enough that when she finally lay down under the furs, exhausted beyond words, his warmth was at her back like a shield. She woke once in the night, heart pounding from a dream of Jonah crying in the dark, and found Felix's hand still resting near hers on the blanket. He whispered something low, soothing, without, fully waking, instinctive, wordless comfort, and she let herself exhale, let herself lean back into that solid presence just a fraction. Jonah's absence was a physical pain, every imagined cry, every small hand reaching for her in the dark. It fueled them onward through ravine and ridge, thorn and shadow, toward Crescent Vale, toward Esme's lair, and toward the reckoning that waited there. In the cold stone of Crescent Vale's castle, Lady Esme paced the length of her private chamber like a panther. Torchlight flickered across walls draped in black velvet, casting long shadows that danced with her every step. Jonah sat in the center of the floor on a thin rug, knees drawn up, clutching Papa Wolf and King Wolf to his chest. His curls were disheveled, cheeks streaked with dried tears, but his big hazel eyes followed Esme's movements with wary fascination rather than outright terror. Esme stopped in front of him, skirts rustling like dry leaves. She crouched slowly, elegant even in cruelty, her pale face framed by raven hair coiled in intricate braids. A circlet gleamed at her brow, the mark of regent, not queen. Not yet. "You're a pretty little thing," she murmured, voice smooth. "Such golden eyes when you shift. A pity they have to go to waste." Jonah blinked up at her. His lower lip trembled, but he didn't cry. Instead, he hugged his wolves tighter and asked in a small, earnest voice, "Where's Mama?" Esme's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Mama is coming, sweetling. And when she does..." She reached out, trailing one long fingernail along his cheek. Jonah flinched, a tiny jerk of his whole body, but he didn't pull away. His grip on the wolves only tightened. "We'll have a lovely family reunion," Esme continued. "Then the prophecy ends. No more child of two bloods. No more threat to my throne." Jonah's brow furrowed in that serious toddler way. "Mama comin'?" he repeated, voice cracking just a little, hopeful despite everything. Esme laughed, the sound curling around the room. "Oh, she'll come, and she'll watch while we fix what's broken in you." She straightened abruptly, brushing dust from her skirts. Then she leaned down again, quick as a striking snake, and plucked Papa Wolf and King Wolf from Jonah's arms. Jonah gasped, a sharp, wounded little sound. His hands opened on empty air, fingers flexing. "No, don't hurt my wolves, please." Esme held them up, inspecting them with mock curiosity. "These? They're just toys, sweetling. You won't need them where you're going." She tossed them toward the corner of the room. They clattered against the stone, Papa Wolf's head cracking once, King Wolf rolling to a stop against the wall. Jonah's face crumpled, his small body curled inward, arms wrapping around his empty chest. Fresh tears welled, spilling over without sound. Esme rose, brushing her hands together. "Take him to the ritual chamber. Bind him. The moon rises in hours. We'll finish this tonight." The guard, a broad-shouldered beta in Esme's, black and silver colors, scooped Jonah up. Jonah went limp, arms dangling, eyes still fixed on the corner where Papa Wolf and King Wolf lay abandoned. As he was carried away, he whispered Mama coming again, like a promise to himself. The door closed behind them. Esme turned to the tall mirror on the far wall. Her reflection stared back, beautiful, cold, unyielding. She touched the glass once, fingers lingering. "Soon," she murmured to the empty room, "soon Felix will have no choice but to kneel." Outside the castle, the night was moonless and thick with mist. Fiona crouched in the underbrush at the edge of the Crescent Vale border, breath fogging in the chill. Felix knelt beside her, hair damp from the run, eyes glowing faintly gold as he scented the air. They had tracked the traitor through 2 days and nights of brutal terrain, ravines, wolf traps, patrols that Felix dispatched with silent, brutal efficiency. Fiona's hands were scraped raw, her cloak torn, but she hadn't slowed. Every step brought Jonah's scent closer, every heartbeat a drum of hurry, hurry, hurry. Felix's hand settled on her shoulder, light, steady. "The wards are thin here," he murmured. "A side gate, rarely used. We go in quiet. Find Jonah. Get out." Fiona nodded, jaw tight. "What about Esme?" Felix's expression darkened. "If she stands between us and him, she dies." They moved like shadows through the mist. Felix shifted partially, claws extended, senses razor-sharp, and led the way past sleeping sentries. Fiona followed, heart hammering, the small pouch of herbs at her waist clinking softly. Milkroot extract, nightshade powder, things she'd gathered in haste from the keep's stores. Not weapons for a warrior, but tools for a mother who knew how to poison a lock, blur a guard's vision, or make a door swing open without a sound. They reached the side gate. Felix sliced the iron bar with one claw swipe. It fell soundlessly into the moss. Inside, the castle loomed, black stone towers, silver, thorn banners snapping in the wind. They slipped through servants' corridors, past kitchens where fires had died to embers, past barracks where snores rumbled. Voices drifted from ahead, low, urgent. Felix pressed her against the wall, finger to his lips. 2 guards passed, arguing about the regent's orders and the abomination child. Fiona's stomach lurched. Abomination. The word landed like a slap. Felix's hand found hers, squeezed once, hard, reassuring, then released. They moved on. The ritual chamber was deep in the castle's underbelly, carved from raw stone, lit by torches that burned blue-green. A circle of runes glowed faintly on the floor. In the center, Jonah sat on a low stone altar, wrists bound with silver cord that smoked where it touched his skin. His small body shook in tight, helpless shivers that rippled from his shoulders down to his curled toes. His breathing came in shallow, uneven little gasps, each one catching like he was trying not to make a sound. His big hazel eyes were glassy and unfocused, staring at the floor like it was the only safe place left. Every few seconds, a fresh tremor ran through him when the silver bit deeper. His small shoulders jerked, a tiny whimper escaping before he bit it back. He rocked forward and back, the way he used to soothe himself to sleep when Fiona was late coming home. But this time, no one was coming to pick him up, no warm arms to lift him away from the hurt. Esme stood over him, back to the entrance, chanting in the old tongue. Her voice rose and fell like a tide. 2 elite guards flanked her, big, scarred, armed with serrated blades. Felix's growl was barely audible. Fiona felt it vibrate through his chest where he shielded her against the doorway. Now, he breathed. They moved as one. Felix exploded into the chamber in full shift, massive wolf, jaws gaping, fur rippling like storm clouds. He slammed into the nearest guard with bone-jarring force, claws tearing through leather and mail in a wet, ripping sound. The man screamed once, high and ragged, before his blade clattered to the floor. Esme whirled, black hair whipping. Felix! Fiona darted low along the wall, milkroot vial clutched in her fist. She uncorked it mid-stride and flung the contents into the second guard's face. The sedative mist hit him like a slap. His eyes rolled white, knees buckling. He dropped face first, skull cracking against stone. Esme laughed, cold, delighted, edged with madness. The human comes to play. Felix shifted back mid-leap, claws still extended. He tackled her, slamming her spine against the wall with a thud that echoed. Release the boy. Esme pulled out a poisoned blade, its silver steel glinting blue-green in the torchlight. She slashed at his ribs. Felix twisted, but the edge bit deep. Flesh parted with a sickening tear. Dark blood welled, soaking his tunic. He didn't flinch. He drove his forearm across her throat, pinning her. Fiona reached Jonah. Her hands shook violently as she sawed, at the silver cords binding his wrists. The metal smoked against her skin, searing, but she gritted her teeth and kept cutting. Mama's here, baby! Mama's here! Jonah's eyes flew open, glassy, fever-bright from the silver's burn. He lunged forward the instant the cords parted, tumbling into her arms. She caught him, crushing him to her chest, shielding his small body with her own as she backed toward the door. Esme broke Felix's hold with a feral snarl, shifting in a blur. Sleek black wolf, crimson eyes blazing. She lunged straight for Fiona and Jonah. Felix intercepted midair, colliding with her in a crash of muscle and fury. They rolled across the ruined circle, claws raking, teeth snapping. Stones splintered under their weight. Felix took another slash, deep across the shoulder this time, muscle tearing, but he drove his claws into Esme's flank, pinning her long enough to roar, "Stay down!" Esme twisted free, blood dripping from her jaws. She shook herself, eyes locking on Jonah. She lunged again, this time straight for Jonah. Fiona stumbled back, clutching Jonah tighter. Jonah, still shaking from the silver's burn, wrists red and blistered, looked up at the black wolf charging them. His lower lip trembled, but something fierce flickered in his golden-flecked eyes. As Esme's jaws snapped toward them, Jonah's small hands shimmered. Tiny paws sprouted, silver fur, delicate claws, reaching out instinctively. He swiped at Esme's muzzle with surprising speed, claws catching her across the nose. It wasn't deep, just a scratch, but Esme recoiled with a startled yelp, blood beading on her black fur. Jonah didn't stop. He wriggled in Fiona's arms, twisting so he could face the threat. "No," he shouted. "Leave Mama alone." He swiped again, paws flailing protectively in front of Fiona's face, tail stub wagging furiously, even as his whole body shook with fear and pain. His brave, desperate gesture gave Felix the opening he needed. He surged forward, tackling Esme from the side. They crashed into the altar, stone cracking. Felix pinned her throat beneath his claws, blood dripping from his own wounds onto her dark fur. "Yield," he snarled, "or die." Esme thrashed once, twice, claws scraping stone, jaws snapping, then went still, crimson eyes wide with fury and something darker, dawning realization. Her chest heaved, blood bubbling at the corner of her mouth. Fiona sank to her knees, Jonah still in her arms, his tiny paws shifting back to fingers as the adrenaline ebbed. He buried his face in her neck, trembling hard. "Jonah, keep Mama safe?" he whispered, one blistered hand patting her cheek. Fiona pressed her lips to his curls, tears streaming. "You did, baby. You kept Mama so safe." For a heartbeat, the chamber was quiet, only the crackle of torches, the drip of blood, and Jonah's soft, shaky breaths. Then Esme's voice cut through the stillness, low, venomous, unbroken. "Never." She spat blood onto the stone, eyes locked on Jonah even as Felix's, claws pressed harder against her throat. "The child dies, or the packs fall. You know the prophecy as well as I do, Felix. His blood is the fracture. Kill him now, or watch everything we've built burn." The words landed like ice picks. Fiona's arms tightened around Jonah instinctively, then stepped forward. The prophecy isn't about killing him. It's about love, about completing what was broken. Human heart, shifter soul, bound together, not torn apart. Esme's eyes narrowed, mocking. Love? From a human widow who couldn't even keep her first mate alive? "Spare me." Fiona didn't flinch. She looked at Felix, blood streaked across his face, chest heaving, wounds still weeping, but his eyes were steady on hers, full of something fierce and tender. She felt it then, the bond he'd confessed to, the pull she'd fought for weeks. It hummed between them now, alive, undeniable, warm as sunlight after endless night. She stepped closer, Jonah still trembling in her arms. Jonah lifted his head just long enough to see Felix. His lower lip quivered, but he reached out one small, blistered hand toward the king. "Big Wolf hurt?" he whispered, voice thick with worry. Felix's gaze softened instantly. He released Esme's throat, only long enough to reach out and brush Jonah's curls back from his forehead. "Not anymore, little one." Jonah's fingers curled around Felix's, tiny and trusting. "Thank you, Big Wolf. You make Mama smile." "Always," Felix promised. The bond flared brighter, gold light flickering along their joined hands, tracing up Jonah's small arm, spilling across Fiona's chest where she held him. The runes etched into the floor pulsed once, then again, warm, steady, not with destruction, but with something ancient and whole. harmony, completion. Esme's mocking laugh choked off mid-breath. She stared, horrified, as the golden light spread, soft, relentless, flooding the chamber like dawn through cracked stone. It touched her black fur, and the shift began to unravel. Sleek muscle, softened, crimson eyes dulled, claws retracting against her will. The power that had fueled her form, ambition, rage, the cold certainty of her claim was slipping. Her shift collapsed inward, fur melting away, leaving her human again, pale, trembling, stripped of the alpha strength she'd wielded like a weapon. She slumped against the stone wall, legs giving out, breath coming in shallow gasps. The silver circlet slipped from her brow and clattered to the floor. For the first time, she looked small. No. Her word came out broken. This isn't... The prophecy said a child of two bloods would mend or break the packs, Fiona said quietly, voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. It never said how. You chose breaking. We chose mending. The light pulsed once more, bright, warm, final, and settled. The runes dimmed to a gentle glow, then faded entirely, their work done. Esme stared at the three of them, Fiona holding Jonah, Felix's arm wrapped protectively around them both, and something cracked behind her eyes. Defeat, not just of the body, but of the vision she'd built her entire life around. The golden light that had flooded the chamber lingered now, soft and steady, coiling around Felix, Fiona, and Jonah like a promise. It touched Esme last, brushing her skin, her trembling form, and where it passed, the last threads of her shift unraveled completely. She tried to summon the wolf again, jaw clenched, breath hissing through her teeth, but nothing answered. The power was gone. The bond's completion had rewritten the rules of lineage and strength. Her claim on it, built on fracture and ambition, had been rejected so thoroughly that her wolf simply ceased to exist. Fiona met Felix's gaze over Jonah's head. Tears streaked her face, but her voice was sure. I choose us, she said simply. All of us. Felix's throat worked. He pressed his forehead to hers, blood and tears mingling, and whispered, always. Jonah stirred in Fiona's arms. He blinked sleepily, then his eyes widened as a sudden memory hit him. He twisted to look back toward the doorway, toward the corridor that led to Esme's private chamber. My wolves, he whispered, voice small and urgent. Papa Wolf, King Wolf, they're still there. Bad Lady threw them. Fiona's heart squeezed. We'll get them, sweetheart, I promise. Felix nodded once, already moving. He scooped Jonah gently from Fiona's arms, careful of the blistered wrists, and carried him toward the door. We'll fetch them now. No one leaves wolves behind. They moved quickly through the corridors. Esme's private chamber was empty, the door ajar. Jonah pointed with a trembling finger. There. Corner. Felix knelt, letting Jonah down. The boy toddled forward, scooped up both toys, Papa Wolf's head still cracked, King Wolf scuffed, and hugged them tight to his chest. Fiona knelt beside him, brushing his curls back. They're safe now, just like you. Jonah looked up at Felix, eyes shining. Big Wolf carry. Us home? Felix lifted him again and offered his other hand to Fiona. Home, he agreed. The morning sun spilled through the tall windows of the tower room at Shadowfen Castle, turning the breakfast table into a pool of gold. Jonah sat between Fiona and Felix on a cushioned bench, knees bouncing with excitement. A spread of food covered the table. Warm bread, fresh berries, slices of roasted meat, honey-drizzled cheese, and a small bowl of creamy porridge. All things he'd never been able to keep down before. Jonah grabbed a piece of bread, tore off a big chunk with both hands, and stuffed it into his mouth. Crumbs scattered across his tunic. He chewed, then beamed at them both, cheeks puffed out like a chipmunk. No yucky bottle, he announced proudly, voice muffled around the bread. Jonah eat big wolf food now. Meat, berries, bread, all good. Fiona laughed softly, brushing crumbs from his chin. All good, sweetheart. Jonah puffed his chest out even farther. Strong like Big Wolf, he waved, his half-eaten bread like a flag, then reached for a slice of meat, taking a huge, triumphant bite. Felix watched with quiet amusement, then leaned over to cut the meat into smaller pieces for him. Careful, little warrior. Don't choke on your victory. Jonah grinned, showing all his tiny teeth. No choke. Jonah big now. They ate slowly, savoring the simple miracle of it. Jonah devouring food that had once made him sick, his small body finally thriving, the prophecy's completion written in every happy bite. When Jonah finally slowed, yawning hugely and rubbing his eyes, Fiona scooped him up. Time for a nap, Jonah. Jonah snuggled against her shoulder, already half asleep. Felix rose, pressing a gentle kiss to Jonah's curls, then to Fiona's temple. I'll carry him. He took Jonah easily, cradling him against his chest as they moved to the small bed beside the window. Jonah curled up with Papa Wolf and King Wolf, breathing evening out almost instantly. The blisters on his wrists had healed to faint pink lines. The room fell quiet except for the soft crackle of the dying breakfast fire and the distant patter of rain starting against the glass. Fiona stood at the window, watching the storm move across the peaks. Felix came up behind her and slipped his arms around her waist. She leaned back into him, letting his warmth seep through her thin nightdress. He pressed a kiss to the side of her neck, then paused. His fingers found the faint scar on her inner wrist, the small, crescent-shaped mark where Joren had bitten her playfully years ago, a lover's mark turned memory. Felix traced it gently with his thumb. Does it still hurt? He asked quietly. Fiona shook her head. Not anymore. She turned in his arms, looking up at him. It used to remind me of what I lost. Now it reminds me of what I survived, and what I chose after. Felix's eyes darkened with something tender and fierce. He lifted her wrist to his lips, kissing the scar slowly, like a vow renewed. I won't ask you to. Forget him. But I will ask to stand beside you, to carry the past with you, not against you. Fiona's breath caught. She rose on her toes and kissed him, slow at first, then deeper, hungrier. His hands slid up her back, pulling her flush against him. The kiss turned heated, urgent, restraint unraveling in the press of mouths, the slide of tongues, the way his fingers dug into her hips like he was afraid she'd vanish. She tugged at his tunic. He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her to the wide bed across from Jonah's. They fell together in a tangle of limbs and whispered names, clothing shed in a rush of need. When he finally moved inside her, slow, careful, it felt like coming home, like completion at last. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back. Rain drummed softly against the glass. A small voice broke the quiet. Mama? Big Wolf? Jonah stood beside the bed, rubbing sleepy eyes, clutching both wolves. He looked at them, then climbed up without asking, wedging himself between them. Fiona smiled, pulling the blanket over all three of them. Jonah nestled against Felix's side, staring at the toys in his hands. Papa Wolf, he whispered, touching the cracked head. Then he touched King Wolf. He pressed them together so their wooden heads touched. But same wolf now. He looked up at Felix, eyes wide and certain. Big Wolf is Papa Wolf and King Wolf. Same. One wolf. For Jonah. And for Mama. Felix went very still. His breath caught. Then he reached out, cupping Jonah's cheek with infinite gentleness. Same wolf, he echoed. And he stays. Always. Jonah beamed, threw his arms around Felix's neck, and buried his face in the crook of the king's shoulder. Love you, Big Wolf. Love you, Mama. Fiona pressed a kiss to Jonah's curls, then to Felix's jaw. Love you both, she whispered. Outside, the storm eased. Moonlight slipped through the clouds, silvering the room. In the quiet, 3 hearts beat as one. Mother, king, child. The prophecy hadn't ended in blood. It had begun in love. What city are you from? Let's meet in the comments. And if you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free, and it helps more people find this story.